Okay, I'm going to try and draw a picture of the main character from my picture book, The Red Tree, which is quite an old book for me now, but still one very present in my mind and obviously very relevant to the winter solstice event for a number of reasons, and it's an honour to be able to participate this year in an online capacity from my own winter bunker here in Melbourne. Social isolation is not unknown to anyone who's spent time as a visual artist. It can be both a blessing and a curse, and I hope everybody is coping reasonably well under the circumstances. I find it quite difficult to draw with other people watching, let alone in front of a camera, so you have to forgive me if this is a little bit awkward. I think one of the things that originally attracted me as a young person to writing and illustration is the fact that it's a form of communication that can be intensely private, hidden, silent, thoughtful, without fear of having to approach either an audience directly or a subject directly. And one thing that's attracted me to writing an illustration as a means of communication, and also I guess a form of self-therapy, is the fact that it's a very gentle way of thinking about things. It's a non-verbal way, which can sometimes work better for some people. But it's also revealing. So I often look at my own work and I find it very surprising. The Red Tree is certainly an example of that. It's a book that started out as an artistic exercise. I was interested in just how can I most simply represent emotional states in a non-verbal way, using the skills that I have, which is largely painting and drawing. And I also, as a young person, and I started thinking about the Red Tree in my early 20s, I didn't know what it was, but I had this idea for a book about particularly negative feelings of loneliness, inability to do things, sometimes the inability to be inspired, which, goes hand in hand with being creative, is having those moments of extreme inspirational vacuum, and you almost go in the opposite direction of feeling everything is pointless and meaningless. And there you are, trapped in your studio, being miserable about the fact that nothing seems to make sense, and everything feels very bleak. I was always very interested in finding use in things, feelings that I thought might actually be quite useless, including those feelings of depression. And when I was young, they were quite a big part of my life, starting out and not really being particularly successful in the arts, or even understanding what I was doing myself. And and the loneliness of the profession can sometimes creep up on you, and if you don't take care of it, and I would find myself feeling quite lost. But that became the inspiration for a number of stories, including The Lost Thing and the one that followed immediately after it, The Red Tree. And I approached a few publishers with the idea of this book about a character, a sort of nameless, voiceless, literally mouthless character being depressed. Although the book isn't really about depression, but it's something like that. That was the best way I could describe it to publishers. And nothing really happens in the entire book. So you can imagine this was a riveting publishing pitch. And it sat quietly. I wasn't even really sure about it, but I felt on some level this was a really worthwhile thing to be doing. It felt honest and truthful. There wasn't any sort of false attempt to be happy or therapeutic. It was just meant to be a representation of this is what it feels like to be very unhappy and very unmotivated, and without having to come up with any solution of how to deal with that, I thought, hey, I feel better already just from representing it in an honest way, just being open and honest and saying, hey, sometimes things are like this. It's very confusing. Nobody understands you. You think that it's a permanent state that's going to last forever and everything is pointless. And there's some small rational part of your mind that says, hey, this is a temporary thing and it's going to pass, as all things do. But the actual other voices that kind of creep in are also saying the exact opposite, and that's really part of the problem. When the book was published, it aroused very mixed feelings from people. I think it was most interestingly was the comment from adults that it's not suitable for children, and coupled with the comment from children that they love it, which I found endlessly fascinating. I also noticed that kids recognize the meaning of the pictures far more readily than adults, who were a little bit too worried about what others would think when you're looking at a work of art. You should really just focus on what you're thinking. And I think if many people did that in the first instance, they'd realize it's a book for them, it's a book about them, and it's a very very gentle book that allows you to talk about a difficult issue without having to, confront it directly, cognitively, verbally, just looking at pictures and wondering how do they make you feel, what do they remind you of, and being aware that there is no necessary deep meaning in the images other than what you bring to them, which can be a very liberating thing for any reader or lover of art. I mean, that's probably what inspires a love of reading and a love of art, is understanding that you are the agent of meaning. The author is just a conduit. Okay, so this is the girl from the red tree, looking quite sullen in a very wintry, solstice-y sort of way, with all the dead leaves blowing through. I guess the thing that's always struck me about both feelings of joy and inspiration and sadness and desolation is that neither of them are permanent, They're both part of an endless flow that seems to happen. And there's something to be said for recognizing that rather than denying it, to just accept that is the truth. Once that does happen, things can move forward a little bit. But the most rewarding thing about working on this particular project was the reception from those people who had suffered all sorts of difficult situations, much worse than anything I'd suffered myself, who found a great deal of relief in looking at these strange pictures of a mouthless girl experiencing all different weird, incomprehensible situations with a minimum of narrative. And recognizing that hope can take all sorts of forms, and starts with a recognition that something exists in the first place, both the sadness and the possibility of happiness. That's the hardest thing to see sometimes when you're feeling that low, is the possibility of that change. But when it it does happen, it has such a powerful corrective force over your whole understanding of the universe. A very simple thing it can be too sometimes. Very simple change. And starts to affect every part of you. Okay, and before I destroy this drawing by overworking, which so often happens, I will just leave it there. And yes, thank you once again for inviting me to be part of Winter Solstice, and I hope you all share many stories, find unity in both grief and joy, in the company of others, most of all knowing that none of us are alone.